Has anyone ever been to a wedding where someone actually objected, and if so, how did that go? Went to a wedding where they skipped that part because the bride's adult daughter was planning to object. The wedding was at the bride's house. They had thought out almost every detail, except one. When the officiant got to the speak now or forever hold your peace part, the cuckoo clock expressed his opinion. Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. It was a full 15 minutes before the ceremony could continue without everyone busting out laughing. I worked a wedding where one of the moms objected, but I think the groom knew that the parent was going to say something, so they just responded with, "Oh, sit down, parent's name, we knew you didn't like this a year ago and clearly we're not going to change our minds today." The wedding continued like nothing happened, but the mom was low-key shunned and people avoided her at the reception. Attended a wedding where the minister said something along the lines of, "If anyone here objects to this marriage, you can keep your mouth shut. Today is not about you." My auntie's fiance was already married. Lady stood up waving marriage cert, so wedding didn't go ahead. The reception was on a longboat, so we still went to that. The fiance went back to home country to sort it out and never came back. I was at a small ceremony indoors, maybe 30 people tops listening. When the minister asked for any objections, a picture of the bride's dead grandmother that was hanging on the wall fell to the ground with a loud thump. We looked at each other, but the minister finished anyway. Divorced within a year. At my cousin's wedding, her friend said I object because she was not invited to the wedding. She was kicked out of the wedding. A woman, in her 20s at the time, objected to her mom marrying my uncle. So she started yelling, "Mom, don't marry him," during the ceremony. The ceremony proceeded and some family on the mom's side lead the daughter away to quit interrupting. I don't blame her, my uncle was a lying, lazy bastard. The marriage didn't last. I went to a wedding where the best man was replaced a week before because he banged the bride. But the wedding still went ahead, just with a different best man. They are divorced now. I went to a Catholic wedding where, when the priest asked this question, one of the groomsmen did a very loud, long, throat clearing, which got everyone laughing. Everyone except for the bride's elderly Italian grandmother, who marched out of her seat and angrily hit the groomsman with her handbag and shouted at him in Italian. The groom objected. He sent his best man with a note and a photo. Texts between the bride and a different groomsman and the affair they were having. I thought it was a stunt or shit. 'Twas real. I was at one where the groom thanked the bride's ex for dying as his loss was my gain. Didn't help the sons of his bride and ex were in attendance. Not quite the question as asked, but too funny to not share. Priest, any objections? Father of the bride lets out the hardest, loudest, most complex sounding sneeze I've ever heard in my life, completely with involuntarily saying a chew-oh. Mother of the bride, hammered on champagne for fuck's sake, Jerry. It took a good 5 minutes for everyone to regain their composure. A relative visited one ceremony where it was asked if anyone objects, and the groom decided it's a good time for a joke and said I do. The lady who was going to marry the couple just turned and left. They had to go through all the paperwork again and change the date. Got married, divorced in like 3 years if I remember correctly. Not a wedding I attended, but my best friend went to her aunt's wedding. Aunt's future toxic mill whips out proof from ancestry that they're actually first cousins. Wedding was cancelled, and the bridegroom haven't spoken since. I got married at the zoo. When we got to that part, the howler monkeys all started screeching. We had a good laugh and got married anyways. A friend of mine has a band that plays lots of weddings and other parties. They were hired for a birthday party that turned out to be a surprise wedding. The guy surprised his GF with a proposal and wanted to have a wedding ceremony then and there. She said no and left. Yes, at my cousin's, the bride's ex showed up, and when he stood up to object, my uncles grabbed him and bum rushed him out of the church and gave him a tune-up in the parking lot. Catholic wedding, of course. Edit, holy shit, Christian rituals around the world are different than the ones I've seen. WTF, impossible. Okay? Groom found out that bride was cheating 2 days before the wedding day. He spilled the beans while exchanging the vows. I was at one when I was 10 and some woman stood up and pretty much said while she had a beef with both the bride and groom she gave them her blessings. We were all like, huh? Wedding videographer here? I have been to the wedding where she and a family member asked 3 times throughout the wedding and waited uncomfortably long for an answer. No one said anything. My mom told me she was going to pay an old boyfriend to stand up and object at my wedding. She didn't in the end, but I did cast a quick look around in the church before walking down the aisle. Yes, I objected at my first almost wedding. My bride cheated with a venue staff member and my best man caught them. I shut the shit show down. Lost almost $20,000 in expenses, not to mention those who traveled. It was a total cluster of K, and I won. Met a woman 3 years later and been married 26 years now. Someone at my cousin's wedding jokingly jumped up and shouted an objection. It didn't matter that he was kidding, the preacher stopped the whole thing dead in its tracks and postponed it. It was awful, not at the altar. But my friend was best man at another friend's wedding and opened his best man speech with, "Me and John have been through thick and thin together, and there's actually a few of those girls here today." Ouch! When my sister got married, they had the pastor skip over that part. I think she knew none of us could stand him. I don't think anyone would have spoken up to object, but the unity candle would not light. So, in a way, I feel like that was God's way of objecting. Or just irony at its best. Divorced about 8 years later after the abusive cheating asshole was found out. So glad he is gone. My brother's wedding, the wife's older brother objected because of political differences. Lol. He was asked to leave by the bride's father. I used to work at a banquet hall, had some interesting nights. Best was the bride and the best man in the ladies' room, doggy style. That killed the evening. I was at a wedding 3 years ago as guest on the bride's side. A guy thug I hadn't met before stood up and called the bride out to leave with him. She looked so shocked, but she left with the guy. Turns out they had broken up long before she met the groom, and he picked her wedding day to reappear in her life. They must be happy, they're still together today. My cat was my best man, and when our friend who ordained our wedding asked if there were any objections, he let out a long ass meow. My mother passed away about 15 years ago. 5 years later my dad married my now stepmother. It was an outdoor wedding on a beautiful sunny day, and during the spot where they usually ask if anyone objects, a big gust of wind came out of nowhere and knocked over some tables. Afterward, multiple people came to tell me that wind gust was my mother objecting, which I like to believe was true. My husband and I got married at a local park where peacocks roam the grounds. Like a script from a movie, the officiant asked if there were objections from the trees. The peacocks all started vocalizing. It was wild and hilarious. We got married despite the clear avian disagreement and have been happily married for 15 years. Take that, you dumb birds! I wanted to pay a local actor to burst into my wedding, shout "I object, I love the bride," and then we each pull swords and sword fight up and down the aisle. In the end I would win and the ceremony would wrap up as planned. My wife did not think this idea was awesome, so we just had a regular wedding instead. Ye saw one where the bride called the future mill a bitch at the rehearsal dinner, and the groom's mom objected the next day and told the story. Groom mocked on the spot. It was crazy. At my brother's wedding the bride's mother stood up very loudly, knocking anything she could, and walked out middle of the ceremony. Didn't say a word but was not seen for rest of day. They have now been married 25 years. Mom died before they could reconcile. They didn't even have a funeral. Just wondering, what happens if someone objects and give a valid reason other than cheating? Like, is there a protocol that needs to be followed, or it's up for bride and groom to decide? Based on this thread, I should look through Ida posts about people jokingly objecting to a wedding and the mayhem it caused. There seems to be a lot of people out there who think this is equivalent to being a heckler at a comedy club. My father-in-law didn't really object, but when the master of ceremonies asked during the wedding of his friend if someone wanted to object, he said, "Well, I don't want to object, but I sure hope this is the last time." Everybody laughed, but the bride was pissed, of course. His friend was a notorious womanizer, not objection per se, but was invited to the wedding as family friends of the groom. The groom's father spent more time thanking us in his reception speech than talking about his son or new daughter-in-law. It was very awkward. No one was enthused to catch the bouquet or bride's garter. Groom's uncle kept asking for pictures of the groom without the bride. The marriage lasted less than a year. The bride's dad objected and got paid out by the best man almost immediately. The best man then yelled out, "I think he misspoke, he seems okay with it now," and put him on the stairs out front. The dad drank nearly $100 of liquor and had to get his stomach pumped at a hospital, so the fact he can even stand to object is the worst miracle I've ever witnessed. Wait for it. My dad said, "What about the objection part?" At my sister's wedding. Celebrant said, "We don't ask that anymore." She ran off and married this fuckwit, so dad sort of had her point. Wedding photographer friend does several dozen weddings a year, been about 8 years. She had her first free wedding where she got paid, but wedding was cancelled couple days before. Called it her unicorn. Played in a wedding band. Turned up for the evening's festivities and were told the couple had decided not to go ahead with the marriage but were still going to have a big party. Bride on the dance floor was the most elated person I've ever seen in my entire life. Happens I know a girl I went to school with, she was engaged twice and both guys killed themselves before getting married, both were in their 20s. Always think that would be harder to deal with. Went to a wedding where the bride was a no-show, so groom's family basically just said, "Hey, we'll all be here and it's paid for, enjoy the meal." His best man even gave his hilariously awesome speech, preceded by, "This is the speech I would have given." The would-be groom has been happily married to a different girl for years. I have not. But at the first day of work, we had a meet and greet exercise. Some guy told us his first wife transitioned to male after their marriage. So he ended up marrying his wife's bride of honor from his wedding. And well, I thought that was just too much info for the first day of work. Lol. I used to work for a very high-end wedding place and worked hundreds of weddings and never got to witness a total disaster. Sex in the coat room was about the best it got, but the word objection wasn't in play in this situation. A random dude snuck into the wedding and objected. He didn't say anything else and sat back down. The security guard just told him to leave and he just left. My brother was not happy about the woman I was going to marry. He was tactful enough not to object during the wedding. Turns out he was 100 correct. Divorced 3 years later, she cheated on me, as I later found out the entire 3 years of marriage. My brother and I joke about it from time to time now, and I get his approval when dating someone new.